Welcome and thank you for joining us on tonight. We're excited to host a discussion with Representative Chrissy Houlahan, focused on the issues that impact every single one of us. How we are going to build back our economy following COVID. Something I'm mindful of, and I know that Representative and the Biden administration are also working hard on, is making sure that we can rebuild our economy so that all Pennsylvanians have the access to the tools needed to get back on their feet. This is important as we look at our communities, as we're looking at our family and our friends. We've seen the devastation that has been faced across the Commonwealth, and we certainly are so happy to have the representative with us this evening to tell us about the work that she's been doing and the resources that she's been bringing back home. This means that also, as we would be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity in light of it being Black History Month to particularly shine light on how policies will impact particularly communities of color, women and other traditionally marginalized communities who also we want to make sure have an equal shot at building businesses and providing for their families. Before we invite the representative onto our discussion, I just want to take a minute to get everyone logged on tonight and to give a lay of the land about exactly what we're up against and what we're talking about when we're talking about rebuilding our economy. Right now, the pandemic is still a serious public health threat. And because we can't safely reopen businesses, schools, and most government offices until the pandemic is under control, many Pennsylvanians are struggling to make ends meet, and our economy continues to struggle. As the virus is far from being under control, in January, we saw cases rising, and we're still far from having it where we would like it to be. Despite necessary precautions by leaders like Governor Tom Wolf, the public health and the economic consequences of the pandemic have impacted communities, particularly communities of color, especially hard, making a relief package critical and crucial to get these communities back on track, along with the rest of the country and the economy. So as you've likely heard, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have a plan, although it's faced some pushback from the Senate Republicans. We'll talk about that more soon. Their plan provides much needed relief to Pennsylvania families as we wait for widespread vaccinations to take effect and to open our economy. The most popular part of the plan is direct relief to families. You probably heard about another round of stimulus checks, but there's a lot more than just that, including an extensive unemployment and national vaccine program. So while we're here and we're waiting, we certainly love for you to drop in the chat. How would Biden's plan help you? How would it help your family, your community, your neighbors, your friends? And so remember, so the things that are in the President Biden's American Rescue Plan include funding a national vaccine program, delivering direct relief to families, expanding and extending unemployment, raising the minimum wage, and providing support to communities. So again, if you don't mind, just take a few minutes, drop in the chat. How would Biden's plan help you? How would it help your family, your neighbors, or your friends? Maybe you are one who has been very fortunate and has not been impacted in a way, but we all know family, friends, church members, members of civic and social organizations that we may be connected with. How would this plan help them? We have some people who says that it will make sure that my grandparents get access to the vaccine. That's very important. We've been talking about the vaccine again for many people who have not been following. There are some residents who are reluctant to take a vaccine. There are some who have expressed really trouble in finding the vaccine or access to the vaccine. So certainly thank you for that comment to Joshua, who talks about his grandparents having access to the vaccine. Polly, who has shared that she hopes to learn more tonight. Marianne, who talks about vaccine production and distribution, again, that is very critical. And Donna, who talks about getting the vaccine actually out to Wayne, Pennsylvania. She says there are a lot of seniors and Black who are unable to get to places for the vaccine, hoping to get a mobile vaccine out this way. Cherie talks about relief funds for community initiatives that impact specifically the homeless and the elderly with the vaccine. Looks like, again, Tim talks about the availability of the vaccine and funds to assist and promote families and small business. All wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ways. we have vaccine doses and logistics would be the most immediate benefit, followed by support for small business. So again, a lot of feedback regarding the vaccine, access to the vaccine for those that we love, for ourselves, and also a lot of interest in how this plan supports small business. Absolutely, absolutely. I'm really excited to have today's discussion about our economic recovery with Representative Chrissy Houlahan. There are few leaders in Congress who have as much entrepreneurial experience as the representative does, and her expertise has helped guide how she's thought about legislation. Representative Houlahan is an Air Force veteran, an engineer, a serial entrepreneur, an educator, and a nonprofit leader. She represents Pennsylvania's 6th congressional district, which encompasses Chester County and Southern Berks County. She serves on the House Armed Services Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and the House Small Business Committee. We are so excited that she is taking time out of her busy schedule. There's a lot going on in DC. If you have not noticed, this administration has taken the mantle and has gone running, and Representative Houlahan has worked really hard to make sure that she represents us in the 6th district of Pennsylvania well. So without further ado, certainly want to welcome her and give her an opportunity just to give some opening remarks this evening before we get into the further discussion about the recovery plan. At this time, we just wanted to give you an opportunity to greet us, to give any open remarks before you and I have a further discussion. Representative Houlahan.
Excellent. And I do apologize for being a little bit late, but hi, everybody, and good evening. I'm very, very grateful to be here today. And apologies for my background. I haven't had a chance to tidy, but I'm really grateful, Ashley, for the opportunity to join you guys here for our future PA tonight. As mentioned, I am the representative of Pennsylvania's 6th district in Congress, and I'm now about 5 weeks into my second term, so officially, I guess, a sophomore. And despite everything that's happened in the last few weeks, it is definitely the honor and privilege of my lifetime to be able to serve my community in this really important capacity at this really critical time. Back home, we like to joke that service is our family business. Both my dad and my grandfather served careers in the Navy, and I have a couple of active duty cousins right now. My brother as well served in the Army as a medic. And as mentioned, I served in the Air Force as an engineer, and my job was on anti-ballistic missile defense at the very tail end of the Cold War. So probably some of you guys who are on this phone were maybe not even alive then. But I settled back in Pennsylvania about 25, 26 years ago. And a lot of the reason why I settled here with my husband and my young children at the time was trying to figure out what our highest and best use was. We are always asking that question of ourselves. And I think that right now we collectively should be continuing to ask that question of one another. What can we do? What actions can we be doing in service of communities that we are fortunate enough to call home? So as I mentioned, the last couple of weeks has been pretty difficult for many of us. The last couple of years as well have been very tumultuous. The year that we've been through together in the pandemic has certainly been one of the hardest, I think, in generations, possibly in hundreds of years. And our economy has clearly been really decimated as a result of that. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we're a nation in crisis, but as Amanda Gorman said, we are certainly a nation unfinished, and I believe we are a nation with hope. So this is the question that I am going to ask of you all and myself as well. What is the highest and best use that we all can ask of one another? For me in Congress, I came because I thought that I had a unique set of experiences, both professional and personal, that I thought could be helpful in being able to advocate and write policy for working families across Pennsylvania. After serving in the Air Force, I was fortunate enough to be a full-time entrepreneur, helping conceive of and start a number of small businesses in our community, some of them that became larger businesses, including And One Basketball and B Corporation, where I served as the chief operating officer of both of those companies. So I think that experience is really crucial now, particularly as we look about how we're going to rebuild our economy. What does the future of work look like? What do future jobs look like? And what do future companies look like? In the month of January, it was reported that the American economy shrank by the most it has done since 1946. And that's a very, very striking and alarming statistic. But we have to look even deeper. Applications for unemployment are still topping what they were during the Great Recession, which just recently, for example, we found that unemployment benefits remain at a historic high at 847,000. Over 100,000 of our small businesses have closed their doors permanently. And as we can tell from all of these data and statistic points, our economy is really in trouble. And this is where I think my personal experience and focus on entrepreneurship will be useful. A lot of the discussion that we have right now, certainly within the last few weeks in Washington, is about getting people back to work, which is definitely a priority. But as many of you probably know, some of those jobs don't exist anymore. Some of those businesses are not there to return to, which is why we really need to be thinking about how do we do the opportunity to create new businesses, to create new jobs. So as an example, one way that we can do that is through, as I mentioned, legislation. This week, we introduced something called the RAMP Act for Innovators. And this is a piece of legislation that will let entrepreneurs access seed capital, access money from the federal government to be able to transfer their idea into a commercially viable business. It also allows people to open doors on places, main streets across the country. And the other thing that's really cool about this kind of piece of legislation is that it's bipartisan. I think that there's a lot of conversation, understandably, about how divided we are as a nation, but you would genuinely be surprised at how much bipartisan work there still is to be done, particularly in the area of entrepreneurship and business and building the economy of tomorrow. And that's why I have endorsed the President's American Rescue Plan, which is the piece of legislation and package that we're all working on, both on the House side and the Senate side. It's a big package, a multi-pronged approach to rebuilding our economy, and it's deliberate. It has a set of very specific actions that we are working on to think about the fallout, economic fallout, to think about our struggling working class families, to think about our unemployed, and to work, of course, to combat the virus that has brought all of this to pass here in our country and in the world. And so that's why it's really important to be here tonight, to have this conversation in this town hall and focus on the future of work, focus on job creation, because we can't wait to have this conversation. It needs to happen now. And that's why this work and these kinds of jobs that we're hopefully envisioning and imagining also need to pay a living wage. They need to be accessible to workers of all different kinds of skill levels and backgrounds. We need to be thinking about educational opportunities like vocational and technical training to make sure that we can prepare our workforce for all different kinds of jobs of the future. Education, jobs, innovation, and entrepreneurship are part of the conversation that we need to have right now to be able to think about rescuing our economy. And I would be remiss to not talk about the gender gap as well in the workforce. That's even widening even more than I thought possible during this pandemic. We spoke earlier about some statistics, and I'm an engineer, so I tend to really like numbers. And so here's another one that's going to hit you between the eyes. In December, the US economy lost 140,000 jobs, and the net jobs that were lost were all lost by women. So even during prior to the pandemic, we know that there was a gender gap in the workforce, in pay and in the numbers of people who work in our workforce. But in 1 month, all of the jobs that were lost were held by women. And that's a very, very sobering data point that I hope will serve as a point of a lesson to be learned and a point of inflection, that when we're thinking about how to come out of this pandemic, that we're thinking about inclusivity, that we're thinking about not just getting back to normal, but what is it that we need to make sure that we're reckoning with. And the disparity between women and communities of color in our jobs is evident. And that means we need to be also talking about another elephant in the room, which is accessible and affordable childcare. Whenever we're talking about jobs, this is something that we also need to be coupling that with. For me, this issue of childcare is personal, because part of the reason why I separated from the military back in the Cold War, in the dark ages, was a lack of access to affordable childcare. My on-base housing was affordable, but it took 6 months before I was able to be eligible to access it. And I simply only had 6 weeks of leave. So it's unfortunate that here in 2021, we're still having this conversation. And in fact, specifically with military families, this is still a chronic issue. So raising a family and having a career shouldn't be antithetical to one another. They should actually be coupled and paired with one another, and there should be a symbiotic relationship. And that's why some of the work that we will be doing in Congress in this office will be focused on addressing that issue more broadly. And before we finish, I need to make sure that we're also talking about paid family and medical leave, because during this pandemic, we've definitely heard countless stories of Americans who were sick, felt sick, had COVID, but didn't have any option to stay home. They didn't have paid sick leave. And these programs are really, really important as healthcare in general. And so one of my very proudest moments in my first couple of years in Congress was to be able to be helpful in passing a bipartisan bill that provided paid leave to 2 million federal workers. And I'll continue to work on that legislation and others to expand this program and access to this program. In fact, we're looking at how we can work with small businesses at issues just like this. So when I think about the 117th Congress, which is the Congress that we're in right now, the very, very early days of it, these are the issues that I'm thinking about. And I hope that they're the issues that my congressional colleagues are too, because I believe that they're priorities for the community. And I hope that I'm representing the community that I serve, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the country. So I and my colleagues are not just trying to build back an economy, we're trying to imagine one that is more accessible and more equitable for every working Pennsylvanian. So it's of course a lot to do in Congress. I'm very, very thankful for the opportunity to talk with you all tonight, and I will turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. No, thank you so very much. Again, we were before, I know you were joining us from another event, and so no need to apologize. We're just grateful to have you. And one of the things we were talking about is how incredibly hard that you work and how incredibly proud we are of you here in Pennsylvania. So you have agreed to allow me to ask a few questions, certainly, and we're going to take questions from those who have joined us either on Facebook or on our Zoom. But I guess, we hear a lot about the American Rescue Plan. And if you had to or describe it, could you give us a lay of the land where we are with the American Rescue Plan right now?
Sure. And it's a really good question. This was sort of a vision that was laid out by President Biden. It is being worked through both the Senate and through the House of Representatives. It's a fairly complex process that we are working through to make sure that we're able to get this legislation passed. And because it's a complicated process, we're now making sure to work through our individual committees to be able to translate the president's vision into words. So at that point, we will be passing that piece of legislation in the House, and then of course handing it back over to the Senate. But the last couple of weeks has been largely setting the stage for the ability for us to start working in committees on that. And so as an example, tomorrow evening, I'll be working with the Small Business Committee that I'm a member of to work on our part of that legislation and to be, working to create the big package that we all then vote on before handing it over to the Senate. I think the thing that's really important and frankly kind of cool about this is that nearly 70% of Americans support this American Rescue Plan. And I think that the reason you see that is that we as Americans, as a Commonwealth and as a community, we really understand that we are in the clutches of a pretty huge crisis. And we're all frankly living it. I just was on the phone with another organization and particularly stressed women, as you could probably imagine, who are just at this point fed up with all of the things that they're being asked to do. And so I think that we're pretty clear-minded that we really need to be working expediently and efficiently to bring this across the finish line for folks.
Absolutely. Certainly. Thank you for that. I guess, could you tell me more about what your office has seen as the actual impact from the American Rescue Plan for Pennsylvania? How will that, how the conversations that we're having, how will it directly impact us in Pennsylvania? What will we see?
Sure. So the package is pretty broad, and it has all different kinds of levers and on it, whether it's attacking and addressing the fact that unemployment will expire shortly, and we need to be thinking about how to expand that and extend that, whether it's issues of combating the disease and making sure that we're creating safe workspaces, safe schools for people. It includes that. Additional stimulus checks for folks to help them. Again, essential help for those folks who are struggling as a result of no fault of their own. It will include that. It will also include money for state and local governments. Many of our state and local governments are really struggling under the weight of having had to put out quite a bit of their rainy day funds, for lack of a better word, to combat the COVID. And as a consequence, after that, their coffers are depleted. They are in the position of having to make hard decisions, like whether to lay off police or EMTs or trash, folks, because in addition to not having that money that they had available for a rainy day, they also have lost quite a lot of revenue as well. And then there's quite a lot of help in the new package, again, for small businesses who have been struggling to keep their doors open. Some that frankly have had to keep their doors closed. And then, as we talked earlier today, this evening, there also was quite a bit of conversation in this bill and resources in this bill for issues like childcare and healthcare and sick leave as well.
Thank you. Want to stay on that just for a little while. We've heard a lot from the Biden administration, and there seems to be really this laser focus on building back better. You've talked a lot about the future of work in Pennsylvania. What does that work look like specifically for Pennsylvania post-COVID?
Sure. And I'll try and paint kind of as broad of a picture as I can about what that means to me, and everybody I'm sure has sort of a different vision about when we're talking about building back better. What does that mean? When we're talking about the future of work, what does that mean? What does work look like in the future? And I think for me, that means empowering small businesses. One of the things I hope I am able to bring to Congress is as experience as an entrepreneur, knowing how hard it is in a very, very best of times to build a business. We are now in some of the worst of times, and we need to find a way to empower the businesses that exist and also be able to engender to start businesses that haven't yet started. We have seen through the pandemic that people have been incredibly creative with their businesses in finding ways to be agile. We need to be able to empower them. It also means that in the future, I hope to see more women and people of color who are running and operating and owning businesses. We saw during the pandemic that some of our best efforts to reach folks, women, veterans, people of color who are owning and operating businesses weren't really working very well. And we needed to be more precise on how we were addressing that age. We need to think about how we can foster innovation to create jobs, not just jobs that already exist, but ones that we haven't even imagined yet. And I think in order to do that, we need a workforce that's ready for those ideas. Today, I had the opportunity to talk to a woman who's starting a remarkable organization through Albright University that is working with 5th through 12th graders on STEM. And I think something like 60% of her kids, and I believe there were 800 or so who've gone through the program, are women, are girls, and something like, I think more than the majority were kids of color. And that's what we need. We need to be able to bring up the next generation to have those critical skills that'll allow us to be able to hire those kids in our future jobs. And so there's a lot of moving parts to try to figure out how do you stimulate all of those different parts at the same time, so that hopefully we end up with millions more companies and millions more jobs and millions more people who are qualified to have those jobs.
Thank you so much, Representative Houlahan. So we highlighted this at the beginning or at our opening. We talked about it being Black History Month. And here at For Our Future, we are making sure to highlight and amplify stories and advocacy opportunities that are related to this important month. When we think about the future of work, how are you and other legislators making sure that the future includes Black entrepreneurs and workers across the Commonwealth and across the country?
Sure. Any policy that doesn't kind of think about that or seriously address the issue that is everywhere, which is systemic racism, is one that isn't a good policy and one that I am not able to support. So we need to be making really strategic, deliberate efforts and really have our eyes open to where systemic racism is hurting us. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One that's not about entrepreneurs per se, but rather about the fact that I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The State Department, as you can probably appreciate, hires a lot of folks, a lot of diplomats. And unfortunately, the State Department isn't really known for necessarily hiring people of color. And as you can probably appreciate, this planet, not just our country, is a pretty diverse planet. And so if we're really going to bring people to be diplomats and leaders in our State Department, we really ought to be thinking about how to make sure to elevate all people and to give everybody the opportunity to serve as a diplomat or as a statesman. And so we have done legislation exactly on that issue. Another thing that I've done is working with Chairman Velasquez, who's the chairwoman of the Small Business Committee, in an effort to prioritize making sure that people who serve in the small business investment companies, the SBICs, which are the organizations that help our small businesses, also are diverse, because we know that the people who help with seed money, we know that the people who are giving money to our entrepreneurial community, they should also look like the community that they're giving to, because then they'll have their eyes and ears open, looking for opportunities that people that if we don't have a more diverse group of folks looking, may not see. They may miss that opportunity. So we have a lot of really cool places where we can be helpful, and we should just always be kind of seeing it through that lens to the degree that we're possibly able to.
So we have some questions from those who are joining us either on Zoom or on Facebook Live. And I know, we don't want to take up too much of your time this afternoon, but hoping that we could ask a few of those and that you may give us an answer. I think one of the first ones comes from someone on our Zoom, and it says, great job on everything you're doing for PA residents and businesses. Question on PPP 2.0. Any consideration to make the second draw PPP requirements more flexible? In the case for our small business quarter 2, 3, 4 of 2020 decline, but not down the 25% compared to the same quarters in 2019. Perhaps there can be consideration to adjust the loan grant amounts, but be more flexible as most businesses have been impacted. Much appreciated.
Sure. There really has been a lot of conversation about trying to be as helpful as possible with PPP and PPP 2.0. And so I'm trying to read the question to make sure I understand. In the case of our small business, Q2, Q3, Q4 decline, but not down the amount compared to the same quarters. So there has been in the second and third, and in this one, I'm sure, adjustments to what PPP can be used for. And some flexibility in terms of making the opportunity for people, as an example, to use it for PPE or the equipment that you need to protect yourself, or to improve your business so that your customers or your employees can be safe. I do not know of anything that is in the works or happening to adjust at this point in time what the requirements are to be eligible for the PPP. In fact, if anything, I would say it's probably likely that it won't be broadened for more people. I think in general, what we're trying to do is be more precise and more surgical, as I mentioned, and get to those really, really small businesses that really, really need it. But I'm hopeful that we'll have the language coming out of the Small Business Committee and on the House side and the Senate side shortly for us to know that answer. That will probably be closer to tomorrow night to know kind of how that will work out.
Thank you so much. And another question coming from our Zoom from Robert. It says, I'm interested in big new universal benefits that offer crucial public goods, not to this group or that group, but to all Americans. Universal benefits and public goods that didn't get included in the COVID rescue bill. One of them would be Joe Biden's proposal for tuition-free community college. Has that been put in a House bill yet? If so, what is it called? How do we mobilize support for it? How do we overcome the Senate's obstacles to passage?
Hi, whoever asked this question, it's a really good question. I am not certain that in these very early days of this administration that bill has been put forward in the House. We're just kind of in the very beginnings of that process, and a lot of the bills that were last session are now still just being introduced again this session. Remember, I don't know if you guys are of the age to remember Schoolhouse Rock, but every 2 years, basically everything gets flushed out and we start over again. So we're now in the process of doing that. I am not on a committee of jurisdiction that would know necessarily if this particular bill of Biden or idea of Biden's has been picked up by somebody who's on our House side or the Senate side. But I'm happy to take a look at it. I do think that this is a good proposal of Biden's proposal for community college, and I know that a lot of people, myself included, are enthusiastic about trying to figure out how to make it happen or something like it happen. I think whether it's been put into a House bill yet or not, I don't believe so. And what the struggle right now is to try and figure out all of the different things we can get into this bill and push that across the line. And then I think there will be subsequent bills that will hopefully include issues like affordability of college. So I don't know the name of the bill, but I'm happy to try and figure out if there is one. I don't think there was one last time on that bill. For you guys who are keeping score out there, there are about 9,000 bills that are put forward every 2 years. So it's pretty hard to keep track of every single last one. And many of them actually are the same idea, but supported by different people. And so what you're trying to do is it's a little bit like a rugby game. You're trying to figure out what part of the team to be on to push something across the goal line. And so that's why you might see multiple similar bills that have similar ideas on them being led by different people.
Certainly want to encourage those who have joined us on Facebook Live or on Zoom. If there are questions or comments, to please drop them in the chat box. One of our chat captains, either on Facebook Live or in the Zoom, will make sure that we are getting your questions and sharing them with Representative Houlahan. So before we got to the question and answers section, particularly for those who have joined us, you brought up the RAMP Act. And so for those who may be not be as familiar, I'm hoping that we may be able to talk a little more about that. So I know you've introduced that. I think we are hopeful and optimistic. We have seen really 4 years, this attempt at really bipartisanship and working across the aisles, but we're happy to hear that you have worked together with Republicans to really push this through. Can you talk more about what the RAMP Act would mean specifically for our economy here in the Commonwealth? And anything else you'd like to share for those who may not be familiar. And we will also make sure that we're sharing information with those who joined us in how they can follow you in your work on the RAMP Act.
Sure. So the RAMP Act is an opportunity for entrepreneurs to be able to access capital or money, for them to be able to apply through different parts of the SBIR and STTR program. A bunch of different parts of the government basically are the seed capital for good ideas and innovation. And what this RAMP Act does is it allows people to be able to, first of all, of course, apply for that money, but to be able to have a faster way of getting on the ramp. So instead of taking as much as a year, it would take 180 days. Instead of struggling with issues like patent support and securing patents, it would be helpful in helping people secure patents. Today, I was on a call with some folks who had created a really cool invention, which I actually won't mention because I know they're in the process of getting it patented. But the speed with which you are able to get a patent is really important for people who are starting businesses, particularly new entrepreneurs who need to protect their intellectual property. This bill also helps people take those ideas and commercialize them or operationalize them. That's another thing that a lot of entrepreneurs have a problem with. There are many, many terrific ideas and many terrific entrepreneurs who have great ideas, particularly, but what they sometimes lack is the next step: how to make a good business plan, how to commercialize something so that it's sellable, how to make sure that you operationalize it so that it's replicable so that you can continue to make it. In Pennsylvania in 2019, we had more than 250 SBIR or STTR awards for about $152 million invested across the state. So this is the kind of order of magnitude that we would be able to help, and then some, if we accelerate the process and provide more resources for these entrepreneurs. And so the hope here is that as we come out of what I hope is a very dark year and into a brighter one, we have the opportunity to stimulate entrepreneurship and to stimulate more companies, because more companies can create more jobs. We aren't necessarily looking to try and just simply reopen companies that already exist, but rather to create new opportunities completely.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a lot of really great things that maybe folks have not thought about or equated to the American Rescue Plan. Certainly, we've talked about, and we want to encourage people to continue dropping their questions and comments into the chat box. One of the things, Representative Houlahan, at the beginning of this conversation, we were asking people how Biden's American Rescue Plan could impacts them or their families directly. One of the things that we heard over and over again was really about vaccine distribution. You know, there are a lot of people who have talked about this being a top priority, feeling like whether there's enough vaccine to go around, and really any insight or thoughts or guidance or suggestions that you have to those across the Commonwealth who have this as a top priority. There are lots of people who made comments regarding seniors, their families, and really, concerns that come both ways about access to the vaccine and being enough. And so any thoughts there or guidance or suggestions for those who have that as a question or really a leading concern?
It is a leading concern. I really think genuinely there's no way that we can collectively get ourselves out of this if we don't address the cause. And the root cause is COVID. The first things that we can do, of course, is to take care of the things we can take care of, which is masks and hand washing and social distancing and all of those kinds of things. But fundamentally, the best way we can get out of this is for an effective treatment and effective vaccines. So this is a place where we have stumbled. We as a nation didn't approach this, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, in a national and holistic way. And had we instead thought about it more nationally and had a very deliberate strategy across all states and across all areas, I think we would have been in a very different place. And so some of this Biden work that he's working on is exactly that, which is to try and create better processes for getting vaccine into people's arms and to create more equitable ways of getting vaccine into people's arms. I think one of the things that we've been seeing is that if you have access, as an example, to technology like the internet, if you have time, as an example, to be able to make lots and lots of phone calls and find the place that has the vaccine, and time to drive to a place to get it, then you are more likely to be able to access it. I've heard lots and lots of people who just today who are worried about their parents and their grandparents who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who are not able to get on the internet, who are not able to drive, an hour. And we need to be able to figure out a national strategy for allocating these shots fairly and for being able to get them to people. And so some of the things that this bill has and other bills have had too is capital resources to be able to have mobile delivery to people so that you don't have to go to the shot comes to you. One of our communities is getting exactly that through CVS this week. They are coming to a retirement community and giving shots to the retirement community. We are not doing a great job in Pennsylvania at this, full stop. There's no other way of explaining it other than we are not doing a good job. And so people like me in places like mine are trying to make as much of a stink about it as possible to try and call attention to where it's working and not working, to try and get answers, to try and have common data. And I will say, honestly, it's as the governor said last week when I was talking to him, we're not doing well and we need to improve. And so it is something that I take ownership of to continue to try and press on so that we can get Pennsylvanians back to work and back to school and back to their lives.
So with that being said, because again, a lot of times there are those of us who are watching, you on a television screen from miles and miles away. how those of us who joined on this afternoon, how do we make sure that we support you in your work in DC to get um, the American Rescue Plan passed, funded, all of those things? How do we help, or what would be your words of advice to those of us who are feeling like, look, there's nothing I can do, or who have just gotten kind of tired of politics?
Yeah, I understand. I would say don't give up. And I would say we need your help. We need your help in a couple of ways. One is call your representatives, whether it's state or local or federal, about the things that you need help on. Let them know, what you need help on. I think also it's hard to explain, but um, please make sure that you're also calling when you're happy with something too, because most of the time we get calls about all the bad things and we don't get a whole lot of positive feedback to understand what is good, what is working. So do both, but also be deliberate with your calling. As an example, I mentioned that 70% of the American public supports the ideas that are in this package. 70% is a lot. And as you've lived in this country long enough, you know that 70% of us never agree on anything really. And if that's the case, make that phone call to all of the representatives that you have, red and blue, to let them know that you are interested in this and this is why. Because we all need to hear from our constituents. On both sides of the aisle, we need to hear that. And that helps us to be able to build the coalitions that we need to be able to make this kind of package work, and to make compromises to make it happen. And that's what we need.
Absolutely. So I am, again, so happy and elated that you've joined us. We're so proud of you for our future. So honored to be able to support you and work on your behalf. Thank you to you, your staff. I know you have another event to run to, but again, we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, and give you an opportunity if there are any final comments, anything you want to share with those who are watching us, either have joined us on Zoom or watching us on Facebook Live.
So I would just like to say thanks. This is a difficult time for all of us. I know that we are tired and that we're exhausted, and that we've been working hard to try to find our way through all of this together. And I am really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about this and to give you some of the ideas of what's happening in Washington. It really is a two-way street. For those of you who are constituents of mine who are on the phone, I'm sure that we can find a way to drop, my information online. What I will say is that I cannot reach out to you. You need to reach out to me in order for me to give you updates of content and substance. And so please do get on my mailing list or email list if that makes sense to you if I'm in your community, or get on your member of Congress's email list or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram feed, because that's the way that you can learn what we're up to. And that's the way that you can help us learn what's important to you. As I mentioned, this is an incredibly huge organization, 435 members of Congress, 100 senators. We're all trying to push and pull in the right direction and get something done. We need you to help us push and pull. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's going on the inside on all of our behalves.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much, Representative Houlahan. If our chat captains can make sure that we are sharing the Congresswoman's information to her website so that we can follow and stay in touch, we will make sure that we regularly update our social media accounts with any great happenings in DC, and all of the work that you do for the 6th Congressional District. Again, we're so grateful to each of you. If we didn't get it to your question, please, we have taken note of those. We will make sure that we connect and follow up. If there are any other questions or concerns for us, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat box. One of our organizers is happy to take that question from you and to follow up individually. But again, we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone, and certainly wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You guys be well and stay safe.